Hey everyone, welcome to a deep dive. This one's going to be really useful for all you folks in the crane world, safety professionals, operators, anyone working towards that crane operator license.
Definitely a lot to cover in this area.
And of course, a big thanks to Safety One Source for helping to make this happen. Today we're going deep on crane modifications. You know, that stuff that can really make or break a project.
Or more importantly, someone's safety.
Exactly. I mean, did you know that sometimes modifying a crane is actually required?
It's true.
And on the flip side, sometimes the manufacturer can just say, nope, not going to happen. So we're going to unpack all of that today. Plus, we'll talk about what to do if you need a modification, but the manufacturer is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, that can definitely be a tricky situation.
So where do we even begin with all of this? I mean, what's the golden rule when it comes to crane modifications?
Well, the golden rule is that you really shouldn't modify a crane if it's going to affect its capacity or safe operation.
Okay, makes sense. But I'm guessing there are some exceptions to that rule.
Right. Modifying a crane that affects its capacity or safe operation is a big no-no unless you meet some very specific conditions.
Okay, so there are exceptions. This is where it gets interesting.
It does.
What are those situations where modifications get the green light?
Well, OSHA lays it all out in 1926.1434. Well, believe it or not, these situations come up pretty often.
Huh, interesting. So what's one of the most common scenarios?
One of the most common is direct manufacturer approval.
Oh, okay. So if you get their blessing, you're good to go, right?
Well, not so fast. It's not just about getting a yes from them. They need to provide updated documentation, too.
Updated documentation, like what?
I'm talking about things like load charts, manuals, even those little instruction tags on the crane. All of that needs to be updated to reflect the changes.
Ah, so it's not just a handshake deal. You got to have that paper trail.
Exactly. Plus, the all-important safety factor cannot be reduced.
Right, safety first. So what happens if you submit a modification request and then the manufacturer just goes silent? Like they're just ignoring you?
Yeah, unfortunately that happens sometimes. But after 30 days of radio silence, you've got options. You can bring in a registered professional engineer, someone who is qualified, of course, to review and approve the modification.
Ah, so the engineer to the rescue. So then that engineer's approval holds the same weight as the manufacturer's.
Precisely. But keep in mind the same stringent requirements apply. The engineer needs to provide all the updated documentation and make sure those safety factors aren't being compromised.
Gotcha. So their sign-off is critical.
Absolutely.
This makes me think about older cranes. What happens if the manufacturer is no longer a business? I mean, you can't get approval from a company that doesn't exist, right?
You're right, and that's a situation that comes up more often than you might think. But in this case, it falls under the same rules as a non-responsive manufacturer.
So we're back to needing that engineer. It seems that they really are the unsung heroes of crane safety.
They really are.
Now, is there a time limit involved? Like, does the manufacturer have a certain window to respond?
Definitely. Even if the manufacturer does agree to review your modification, they have 120 days to get back to you.
Wow, 120 days. That's 4 months. Plenty of time for a project to get stalled. If they miss that deadline, we're back to needing that engineer's approval, right?
You got it.
Are there any other scenarios where an engineer's stamp of approval is absolutely essential?
Definitely. Think about marine work sites. Sometimes you'll find cranes that are like a Frankenstein's monster of crane components cobbled together with parts from multiple manufacturers.
I can imagine that must lead to some serious headaches.
It can, but the key is making sure that everything works together safely, even with components from different sources.
Right.
And that's where that engineer's expertise is vital.
Makes sense. So in those cases, modifications would also require a qualified engineer's sign-off.
Exactly.
We've talked a lot about when modifications are allowed, but what about the flip side? When are they absolutely forbidden? Is it ever a situation where the manufacturer just puts their foot down and says, no way?
It can be. Sometimes, no matter how good your arguments are, the manufacturer might just reject your modification request. And OSHA specifically addresses this in 1926.1434b.
So no wiggle room, no appeals process or anything?
Well, there's one crucial detail. The manufacturer has to provide a written explanation for why they're refusing. If they don't, you might actually be able to proceed as if they were unavailable.
Meaning you could go back to that trusty engineer for approval.
Exactly.
So documentation is key. You got to get everything in writing. Now, what about cranes modified by the military? Do those fall under the same OSHA regulations?
That's a great question, and the answer is no cranes modified by the U.S. military are exempt from the standard OSHA rules.
Interesting. I wonder why that is.
Yeah.
Maybe we can explore that in another deep dive. Speaking of interesting cases, there was a real-world situation involving older galleon dresser cranes that I think really highlights why these regulations are so important.
You're talking about the case where they were using the crane's hydraulic system to compensate for faulty brakes, right?
Yeah, using the hydraulics as brakes. That sounds incredibly risky.
It is, and it's definitely not OSHA compliant. This issue was actually brought to OSHA's attention by Senator Vitter in a letter outlining the concerns raised by a constituent, a Mr. LeBlanc, who had witnessed this practice firsthand.
So what was so dangerous about using the hydraulic system this way? What were the potential consequences?
If the engine dies or the hydraulics fail for any reason, that load is coming down fast.
Right.
And there's no backup system, no safety net.
Yikes. That's a terrifying thought. This really underscores the importance of proper maintenance and never cutting corners, especially with something as powerful as a crane. So how did OSHA respond to this? Did they offer any guidance?
They did. They were very clear that using the crane's clutch to make up for worn-out brakes on these galleon dresser cranes is a violation of safety standards, and they offered some specific advice.
Like what?
Well, first, they recommended having a qualified person calculate a reduced load capacity for the crane.
Makes sense. You wouldn't want to exceed the safe lifting limits, especially with compromised brakes. And I'm guessing that reduced capacity has to be clearly posted on the crane.
Absolutely. No hiding it in a file folder somewhere. They also stressed the importance of following the manufacturer's guidelines on limiting hoisting time.
So give those older brakes a chance to cool down.
Right. It's all about managing risk and ensuring a safe working environment.
Solid advice. Now, in his letter, Mr. LeBlanc mentioned that he had developed an add-on brake for these older cranes. Of course, OSHA doesn't endorse specific products, but it brings up an interesting point. Modifying a crane with an add-on brake, even if it's designed to improve safety, still requires manufacturer approval, right?
Absolutely. And as we discussed earlier, what happens if that manufacturer is no longer around?
Right, back to needing that engineer's approval.
You got it. If the manufacturer is unavailable, that engineer's sign-off on the add-on brake is critical.
This whole thing just keeps coming back to the engineer. They really play a pivotal role in crane safety.
They do. And this actually ties back to that proposed 1926.1434A, which specifically deals with situations where the manufacturer is out of the picture.
Which emphasizes how important it is to stay up to date with the latest OSHA regulations.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive has been really eye-opening.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much goes into making sure that cranes are operated safely, and how even seemingly simple modifications can have major implications.
It's true. Cranes are incredibly powerful machines, and even the smallest changes can have a big impact on safety. That's why these regulations are so important. They're there to protect everyone.
Well said. So, for all our listeners out there, especially those working towards their crane operator license, what are some key takeaways you should remember from our discussion today?
First and foremost, always consult the manufacturer before making any modifications to a crane. It doesn't matter how minor they might seem.
And don't forget about documentation. Get those approvals in writing. And if the manufacturer is unresponsive or out of business, remember that a qualified engineer is your new best friend.
That's right. Their expertise is essential in making sure any modifications meet the highest safety standards. Oh, and of course, never try to compensate for faulty equipment with risky workarounds.
Like using your hydraulic system as a brake. Bad idea.
Very bad. Regular maintenance and sticking to established procedures are non-negotiable when it comes to crane safety.
Couldn't agree more. This deep dive has really driven home the importance of staying informed about OSHA regulations and industry best practices.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when safety is on the line.
And a huge thank you to Safety One Source for sponsoring this deep dive into crane safety and modifications. You guys are doing fantastic work in keeping workplaces safe.
They really are. Safety One Source is an incredible resource for anyone in the industry.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of crane safety. Whether you're a seasoned operator or just starting out, understanding these regulations is so essential.
And before we go, I want to leave you with a little something to think about. We've been talking about cranes today, but what other types of equipment might have similarly complex rules around modifications?
That's a great question. What do you think?
Well, think about any machinery that's involved in lifting, moving, or supporting heavy loads.
Yeah.
Things like forklifts, aerial lifts, excavators, even scaffolding, all of that stuff has very specific safety regulations governing modifications.
Wow, that's a lot to consider. Sounds like there's always more to learn and explore when it comes to safety.
Definitely. And that's what makes this field so interesting. There's always a new challenge, a new regulation, a new innovation to keep us on our toes.
Well, for all of you safety professionals and future crane operators out there, what's the one key takeaway you should remember from this deep dive?
If I had to sum it all up in one sentence, it would be this. Never underestimate the impact that modifications can have on equipment safety. It doesn't matter if you're adding a component, changing a system, or even just adjusting a setting, you always need to proceed with caution, consult the regulations, and get expert advice if you need it.
That's a great way to put it. Safety is a shared responsibility, and understanding the complexities of equipment modifications is crucial to creating a safer work environment for everyone.
Absolutely.
Thanks again to Safety OneSource for sponsoring this deep dive into crane safety and modifications. Keep up the great work in keeping workplaces safe.
Couldn't agree more.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay safe out there.
Stay safe. You know, it's really fascinating. The more you learn about crane safety, the more you realize how much there is to it. It's not just about operating the machine. It's about understanding the engineering, the regulations, the potential hazards, all of it.
It really is like peeling back the layers of an onion. And speaking of those layers, this whole discussion about modifications and getting manufacturer approvals has got me thinking about the bigger picture. What's the history behind these regulations? Why are they so strict?
That's a great question, and the context is really important. These regulations weren't just dreamed up overnight. They've been developed over time, often as a direct response to accidents and incidents that, well, highlighted the need for tighter controls.
So they were born out of necessity.
Exactly. Imagine a crane collapse back in the early days of construction, before these regulations were in place.
I can only imagine what the consequences would be.
It would have been devastating. The evolution of crane safety regulations is a testament to those hard lessons learned from past mistakes and a commitment to continuous improvement.
So it's not just about blindly following the rules, but actually understanding the reasons behind them.
Exactly. And that understanding is so crucial for anyone who's involved in crane operations, whether you're a seasoned operator or you're just starting out.
Now, we've talked about situations where modifications are allowed, but I'm curious about the flip side. When might a manufacturer outright reject a modification request? What are some red flags they would be looking for?
Well, there are several things that could lead a manufacturer to say no. One of the biggest ones is if the modification would compromise the structural integrity of the crane. Cranes are designed with very specific load limits and stress tolerances, and messing with those parameters can have some pretty serious consequences.
I can see how that would be a major concern.
Yeah.
What else?
Another big one is if the modification interferes with the crane's safety systems, like the braking system or the overload protection devices. The manufacturer is going to be very hesitant to approve anything that could affect those systems.
Right. Those safety systems are there for a reason, to prevent accidents and protect people.
Absolutely. And the manufacturer has a responsibility to make sure those systems remain fully functional and reliable. They're not going to sign off on anything that could jeopardize that.
So it's really a balancing act between functionality and safety.
It is. You might have a fantastic idea for modification that improves efficiency or something, but if it compromises safety in any way, it's a no-go.
And that's why it's so important to involve the manufacturer early in the process.
Exactly. Don't just assume you can make changes without their input.
Communication is key. Open and honest communication with the manufacturer is absolutely essential to ensure that any modifications are both safe and effective.
Couldn't agree more. Now, before we move on, I want to touch on something we discussed earlier. The role of that qualified engineer, especially when the manufacturer is unavailable or not responding.
Right. They seem to wear a lot of hats in the crane safety world.
They really do. Their expertise is so valuable in these kinds of situations. Imagine, for instance, that you're working with an older crane and you need to replace a critical component. The original manufacturer is long gone and you can't find an exact replacement part.
So what do you do?
Well, that's when you call in the engineer. They'll analyze the situation, figure out the load requirements, and determine if a suitable substitute part can be used safely. They might even have to do some calculations, run some tests, or even design a custom solution.
It sounds like they would need to be pretty creative sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Their job is to make sure that modified crane meets the same safety standards as the original one.
That's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
It takes a deep understanding of engineering principles, crane mechanics, and of course all the safety regulations.
You got it. These engineers are the unsung heroes who make sure that older cranes can keep operating safely and reliably even when parts become obsolete and manufacturers disappear.
It's amazing how they manage to keep these older machines running safely.
It really is. Their contributions are often overlooked, but they're so vital to keeping work sites safe and projects moving forward.
This whole discussion has really highlighted the importance of expertise and experience in crane safety. It's not just about knowing the rules, it's about understanding all the nuances and potential issues that can come up.
Exactly. And that expertise goes beyond just the engineers and manufacturers. It includes the operators, the safety professionals, the riggers, everyone who is involved in the lifting operation.
It's a team effort.
Absolutely. And that's why ongoing training and education are so important in this industry. Staying up to date with the latest regulations, the best practices, and new technology is crucial.
Speaking of technology, I'm curious about its impact on crane safety. Are there any new innovations or tools that are really changing the game?
Oh, there are. We're seeing some incredible advancements in load monitoring systems, anti-collision technology, and even remote crane operation.
Wow, so technology is playing a bigger and bigger role in preventing accidents.
It is, and it's also helping to improve efficiency and create a stronger safety culture on work sites around the world. And as technology keeps advancing, we can expect even more sophisticated tools and systems that will continue to make a difference.
That's really exciting. Now, for those listening who are new to the world of cranes, this might all seem a little overwhelming. What's one piece of advice you'd give someone who's just starting out?
My advice would be this: never be afraid to ask questions. Crane safety is a complex field, and it's impossible to know everything right away. Don't be afraid to ask for help from more experienced operators, safety professionals, or engineers.
That's great advice, and it applies to any field, really. Never stop learning, never stop growing.
Exactly. And in the crane industry, that commitment to continuous learning can literally save lives.
Well said. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground today, but there's one more thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up. The role of Safety One Source in supporting crane safety initiatives.
Absolutely. Safety One Source is such a valuable resource for anyone in the industry. They offer a wide range of training programs, compliance tools, and expert guidance to help companies and individuals navigate the world of crane safety.
I've heard great things about their programs. Can you tell us a bit more about what they offer and how it could benefit our listeners?
Definitely. Safety One Source provides comprehensive training courses for crane operators, riggers, signal persons, and safety professionals. They cover everything from the basics to more advanced techniques, and they make sure that everyone has the knowledge and skills to operate cranes safely and efficiently.
That's fantastic. And they also help companies put together strong safety programs, right?
That's right. Safety One Source can help with everything from hazard assessments and risk mitigation strategies to compliance audits and managing documentation. They're truly a one-stop shop for anything and everything related to crane safety.
It sounds like they're playing a huge role in promoting a culture of safety within the crane industry.
They really are, and their commitment to excellence and innovation is helping to set a new standard for crane safety across the board.
It's really inspiring to see organizations like Safety One Source dedicated to making workplaces safer. For our listeners, I highly recommend checking out their website or reaching out to their team to see what resources they have to offer.
I second that. They're a true asset to the industry.
This has been an incredibly informative deep dive. We've explored so much, from the intricacies of crane modifications to the history of safety regulations and the impact of technology on the future of the industry.
It's been a great discussion, and I hope our listeners have a better understanding of crane safety and the importance of being proactive and informed when it comes to managing risk.
I agree. And as we wrap up this segment, I want to leave everyone with this thought. Crane safety is an ongoing journey, not a destination. It demands continuous learning, vigilance, and a dedication to always doing things the right way.
Well said.
It's amazing how much we've learned about crane safety just by focusing on modifications. It's a whole world of regulations and engineering and best practices that I think most people probably never even consider.
It's true. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to protecting people. Every rule, every guideline, every safety procedure, it's all about making sure that everyone on the worksite goes home safe.
I like that. It really puts things in perspective. So for our listeners who are new to this, maybe working towards their crane operator license, what's one piece of advice you wish you'd gotten when you were starting out?
That's a good question. You know what I would say? Never underestimate the power of observation. When you're on a site, pay attention to everything that's going on around you.
Right.
Watch the experienced operators. Really listen during those safety briefings. Ask questions. Just soak up as much knowledge as you can.
That's great advice. It's not just about learning the technical skills, it's about developing that awareness of your surroundings and really understanding the safety culture of a work site.
You got it. The more you observe, the more you learn, and the better prepared you'll be to make smart decisions, safe ones.
Well, before we wrap up this fantastic deep dive, I want to give another big shout out to Safety One Source for making this episode possible.
Absolutely.
They're doing incredible work supporting crane safety and giving the industry such valuable resources.
Couldn't agree more. Safety One Source is truly a champion for crane safety, and their commitment to excellence is making a real difference out there.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of crane safety. We hope you found it informative and engaging.
We did our best. And we hope you'll keep exploring the world of crane safety. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe out there.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh.
Until next time.